Hi, I'm Kevin Durrheim. I'm a social psychologist based at the University of Johannesburg, and I've been working on this polarization project using word embedding technologies, machine learning, with Maria Schultz, she's a physicist at Xanadu, and our PhD student Martin Mafunda at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just describing the application, the development of this technology, plus also the application to measuring and understanding the problem of polarization. So firstly, what is polarization? We're interested here in opinions, described very famously as when opinions become far apart in content and people are pushed towards the extremes, represented very nicely over here in the Dinkelberg et al. Recent paper. They use it's a network representation of opinion differences in attitude sets of self-identified Republicans and Democrats from the American National Election Survey 2016. But you can see there, essentially, the Democrats and Republicans, the opinions are polarized. They're far apart in content, and they're balanced at the ends of the opinion spectrum. Of course, opinion polarization has become very well talked about, frequently talked about, in terms of concerns around social media and the effect that social media is having in the polarization of our society. Just some terms: cyber balkanization, the development of these pockets of homophilous groups, also called information cocoons, because information circulates within these homogeneous pockets. Here's a representation. This is a very famous, it's a sort of landmark study by Damage and Glance, and they looked at blog links there, and how often do Democrat and Republican websites or blogs have links to either within the group or between the group. And you can see this concept of this balkanization, or these homophilous groups forming, and how information then circulates within each of these groups. Of course, on top of that are psychological dynamics, conformity dynamics. We now express opinions to conform to our groups. We can also criticize and eco-slam opponents, hate speech. Social science algorithms add to all of this because they present information that you're already familiar with, or you already know. So it contributes to this cyber balkanization and the formation of these information cocoons. Why this is important is because it's been linked to the emergence of extremism, polarization, radicalization. And so there's a kind of contrast of the threat that this has even for democracies, because in the past we had much more centralized media that act as a kind of unifying force, and now with social media there's this kind of fragmentation, these concerns around extremism and polarization. But the thing that's often missing from the studies of polarization, especially on social media, is the focus on language itself. Some recent work has suggested that polarization is instantiated linguistically, and of course that's true. How does polarization happen? Polarization happens in language. People share ideas, they agree with their in-group, they disagree with the others, they criticize. Language becomes a mechanism for social differentiation, for the creation of groups, for building ties, to building relationships, persuading, mobilizing, the construction and communication of grievance, moralized content that is so important to the effective aspects of polarization. These all happen within language, and yet language hasn't been the way in which polarization has been studied. It's either been studied through responses to attitude surveys, or like in the previous slide on social media, they use blog links or other structural ties between individuals. So the question is, can we investigate and understand polarization using language? And this is what we've tried to do by constructing these things we call speaker landscapes. And we've used word embedding technology. And essentially what a word embedding is, if you look at the second bullet point there, you train a machine learning algorithm on a text recognition problem. So, and you can feed the algorithm vast quantities of text, the whole of Wikipedia, Google Books, whatever. And it will basically read little windows of words and try and predict the next word. And so it recognizes how words are used. In other words, the context within which words are used. And in doing that recognition, it embeds or puts words that have similar meaning close to each other in a high-dimensional space. So normally a word embedding it consists of sets of word vectors, and each word is represented by a string of, say, 200 numbers or 250 numbers that uniquely identify the place of that word in the embedding. Now, I've got a small little representation over there of a three-dimensional, not a 250-dimensional, but a three-dimensional embedding, and you can see that words no to vaccine, kill by, and pandemic are represented there in grey. And that's essentially what a word embedding does. It uses machine learning to understand the meaning of words and how they're used, and then represent them in a high-dimensional space about how close or distant they are in that space captures the similarity or difference in the semantic meaning, the content of those words. So what we've done is we've added speakers, we've annotated speakers, and we've put the speaker annotations, or in other words, speaker labels, into that word embedding. That's what we call a speaker landscape. It's simply a speaker annotated word embedding, where the speaker's identifier, their names or their handle or whatever, is included in the embedding, and all the words that they use represents how similar or different the speakers are from each other. So now we've got a way of representing speakers, the similarity and difference, by the words that they use in their communications. And that's also represented in the little image I've got up there. So you can see QAnon on the top right over there. There's a speaker and agent. And now the speaker is embedded close to QAnon types of language, no to vaccine, kill by. And then on the bottom right-hand corner over there, you see we've got the World Health Organization, WHO, and the Ministry of Health embedded close together. They're using public health type of language, boosters, vaccines work for all, etc. And so we've got a method now, training these word embeddings with speaker annotated word embeddings of representing people in a landscape by how similarly they speak, the words that they use, the language that they use, and we can put the words that they use into that same landscape. Let me show you what one of these look like. This is one we've done on, it's done in South Africa using newspaper quotes from speakers. There's 120 speakers there. You'll see them in the colored dots, and there they are from, those dots are colored by the political party that they're in. And you can see that our embedding puts on the bottom right hand corner there, we've got those blue dots. It's a blue cluster over there. That is the Democratic Alliance. It's the official opposition in South Africa. On the top left of the embedding are the red dots. That's the economic freedom fighters. We can call them a far left populist group. And you can see that the language landscape is split. It's polarized around land reform in South Africa between, on the top right, the economic freedom fighters, the red group. Look at some of the language they use there: expropriation of land, white supremacy, apartheid regime. It's a pro-poor political and ideological group. And on the bottom right, look at the language that they use: law enforcement, service delivery, law enforcement agencies, illegal occupation. It's a pro-capital, concerned about informal settlements, land invasions, etc. So you can see basically the ideological divide in South Africa very clearly represented in the speaker landscape, in the split between the kind of pro-poor and the pro-capital political parties, opinions, etc. The green dots are the ruling party, the African National Congress, and they are factionalized and divided, and you can see them splitting across that divide. Some of them here more closer to the Democratic Alliance, and others more closer to economic freedom fighters. And so this is just an initial demonstration. So some of the things that we learn from this about word embeddings and these landscapes is they are made up from language. They're constructed out of language. It's all the words that these speakers have used to construct their position within the space. And so we can see there's a whole lot of linguistic features that are absolutely clear from the speaker landscape. The ideological differences, there's issue differences on the bottom right. The DA are interested in urban contexts of informal settlements. On the top left, the EFF are interested in restoring the land of Africa back to Africans. It's a much more global issue. You can identify individuals very clearly about for example, there's one blue dot away from the rest, close to the EFF, that there is the previous leader of the DA that actually left the DA. So you can really see that individual's opinions weren't putting that individual in that group. And there's lots of other linguistic and qualitative analytic features that we could concentrate on. But what's so interesting about this is that even though we're only observing language, the technology allows us to identify groups, and the groups are so clearly separated. And not only are the groups separated, but the social structure or the organization of those groups in the ideological sphere are represented in a polarized dynamic. And so the polarization is actually evident within these speaker landscapes, and that we thought was pretty amazing. So we obtained this data from colleagues in Australia. You can see their reference to the article. And this is Twitter data based in the United States, pre-pandemic, and that was 75 days before the World Health Organization declared the pandemic, and then 75 days after, post-pandemic. And this is a classic way of using community detection algorithms based on retweeting. So who retweets whose tweet, and each one of those lines connecting the nodes are the individual tweeters, and then the lines are retweeting. And so we can see a very characteristic feature of a social network is that there's these what they call cyber balkanization that I mentioned early on, of those information cocoons, where we've got this divide between the Democrats in blue, the Republicans in red, and they identified five different clusters. Actually, they didn't run a cluster analysis of that. The anti-vaxxers, public health, and then they had a group there called the unorthodox group. And you can see that actually what they found is that from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, using the network ties, in other words, retweet behavior, they found actually more sharing of information. In other words, you can see that there's lots of lines now between these different sectors. In other words, people are finding information and retweeting information even from opposing camps. So that there doesn't really show a clear picture of polarization. So what we did next was we tried to we analyzed that same data, now looking at language using our speaker landscape technology. And so this is the pre-pandemic one. We can see that it clearly identifies the different clusters, but there isn't a clear polarized view there. The clusters are apparent, but the polarization isn't very clear, especially the Republicans in red. They are quite close to the Democrats in blue, and then you've got sort of a little bit of polarization between public health and in yellow there, and the anti-vaxxers in black. But look what happens post-pandemic. Now post-pandemic we get a clear, this polarized structure. On the one pole you've got a very strong pro-vaccine up top there, vaccines for all, celebrate vaccines, people's vaccine. It's a strong public health language. Down on the bottom, you've got vaccines kill, Bill Gates vaccine agenda, etc. The anti-vaxxers. And now the anti-vaxxers become split between those that are right at the bottom, and you'll find there we can almost call them vaccine hesitant group, closer to of the black dots, also amongst the Republicans. It's interesting now we see a very clear polarization or separation between the Republicans and Democrats, where the Democrats converge, their language converges with the language of the public health. The Republicans' language converges with the language of the anti-vaxxers. So this polarized structure is very, very evident in the language that these individuals are using. We've done some statistical analysis on the nearness between these clusters, basically calculating the mean distance of each individual within the clusters from each other, or the mean distance of each individual. Take this row 3 there, the anti-vax, how close is each individual in anti-vax to the Republicans? Then we've done that pre and post pandemic, and we find, you can see there that the mean change column there, the green, indicates they're converging, they're becoming like each other. Anti-vax become like Republicans. The Democrats become like the public health. We could see that in the image, and then the Democrats and Republicans become very unlike each other. Why? Because they're accommodating this language in that language space. And so, what conclusions can we draw from this? So, firstly, speaker landscapes are constructed purely on a machine learning algorithm that studies language. It represents the similarities and differences in the language that individuals use, and then we represent those individuals in a two-dimensional space according to the language that they use. But the interesting thing, this language lens allows us to identify social groups. It allows us to identify the ideological differentiation between social groups and the structural relationship between them, whether they are polarized or unpolar or not polarized. We can study how the structures change over time, as we did with the vaccination debate. So the speaker landscapes appear to be a powerful tool for studying polarization, but they don't only allow us to identify polarization, they also tell us how polarization occurs through the appropriation of language. And we can see how Democrats appropriated the language of public health during the vaccination, during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Republicans appropriated the existing language that was used by the unorthodox, what is called unorthodox group. And so we've got now this increasing polarization, political polarization around vaccinations during the course of the pandemic. And that's the end. Hope you enjoyed the talk. Look forward to answering your questions.